hardbound. But when I hate you, it's because I love you. That's how I am. So what can I do? I'm happy when I'm with you. Count, Basie.
Okay, we're about to get this show on the road, I think. Okay. Call this special workshop meeting of the City Council to order. Council, before you have a copy of the proposed agenda for tonight's meeting, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Let's start out real quick. Chief Lee, our fire call over there in Azalea Gardens. Can you give us a little update on what happened? What was going on?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. We currently have 17 occupants that have been displaced out of the Azalea Garden apartments in that building. However, the property management has already gotten some vacant apartments that they had opened back up and already is starting to relocate those into additional apartments in that area. We also have American Red Cross on scene providing assistance, as well as I just found out the Salvation Army is there with a mobile canteen providing food to those displaced occupants as well.
Very nice. Any injuries?
No injuries. No one was injured. None of the firefighters were injured in the course of the fire. They were able to save a cat, however.
Oh, well, that's a happy cat, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, thank you very much for the update.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate that. All right, we have 3 items on the agenda here, and I'll let you go ahead and start, Dr. Woodruff.
Mayor and council, thank you all very much for coming out on a rainy day. One of these days, springtime is going to come, and we'll be able to enjoy watching the flowers grow instead of the cold weather. This evening, there are 3 things we'd like to discuss with you in workshop. The first is the overview again of the capital improvement program for FY15. The second is to talk to you about the purchase of potential air packs for the coming budget. And the third is to give you some pre-budget information. What I'd like to ask Deanna to do is provide you with a quick overview of where we are on the capital improvement program. We are again not asking for you to adopt that. That would be premature. We are again asking for your guidance so that as we finalize the draft budget, we will be able to know exactly what you're thinking of relative to capital projects. Based upon your direction tonight, we will finalize the budget. Then once you get into the detailed budgets, you will be making the final decisions on whether those things will stay in the budget. But at this point, I'd like Deanna to give you a quick overview, please.
Good evening. A few weeks ago, we talked about the new projects for FY15 as well as the projects that were recently added during the CIP process. These are the same slides that we talked about. Again, as you can see here, the FY15 sidewalk installation is going to be designed and constructed in 15. The inflow and infiltration project is going to be design only for FY15. The automated step screen at LTS and the FY15 street rehabilitation, both of those projects will be design and construction in 15.
Before you leave that. Now remember, all of these projects that are up here come from a funding source other than the general fund. The funding source for the sidewalks is
Powell bill.
and what is the funding source for the others?
And Powell bill is also for the street rehabilitation, and water and sewer funds for the I&I and automated step screen.
Thank you.
Are the sidewalks new, or?
Each year we rely on the MPO to identify the sections of sidewalks that we're looking at, but normally it is new. Some other new projects for FY15, the median improvements along Western Boulevard. That is actually a placeholder for a potential future project with NCDOT, and that would be either NCDOT grant or general fund. Park Lane and Stratford water and sewer rehab. This project is programmed for design in 15. Obviously that would be water and sewer funding, along with the water line replacement. And the Plantation Boulevard and New Frontier Way, that will be general fund. And that project, that $30,000 in FY15 is just a preliminary design planning to see exactly the details or the scope of that project.
Now that project is to better align that intersection, is that correct?
Yes.
Where is the New Frontier and Plantation? What is that?
That's,
Making that a T or a,
You're talking about Crossgun Branch Road.
right, that's correct.
The opposite.
Yeah,
The old Discovery Church, or not Discovery, but what is that?
yeah, it's River of Life
River of
Church.
Life.
Yeah, the idea would be, this would be a project that we would try and compete for state funding.
Was that,
But does a 30 cover it all?
that's design?
Well, that's
Oh,
just preliminary.
Okay.
It's something that's not on the STIP.
I understand.
To be able to get on it, you've got to start certain preliminary things. This would be some of the preliminary work before we would start down that process.
And these are just new projects that we added to the entire CIP in outlying years. And as we discussed last time, that they range in funding from general fund, water and sewer, Powell bill, etc. Some of the newer ones would be the Northeast Creek Park Playground, the Commerce Road Extension, the Holiday City Mobile Home Park Lift Station. And again, these are projects that are in essence placeholders, that as we move into the funding year, these would be projects that staff would spend more time evaluating the more in-depth scope of work.
Again, the Commerce Road Extension, that's another one, just like the Plantation and New Frontier Way. What we're trying to do is basically interject new projects on the state funding list. And so what we would be doing is starting to do the preliminary work. But this again would help us unload the intersection of Western and Marine by providing alternate connections. In this case, it would be between Western and Piney Green, as a parallel in that. So again, these are why we've started to introduce them into the CIP.
And then the continuation of the latter 3 years, again, we've got the Georgetown Collector Street improvements to elaborate on what Mr. Massey had already stated, the Kerr Street Fishing Pier, the Commons Tennis Courts, and again, Liberty Drive improvements.
now remember, other than the first year, the funding year, all of these others are what I'll call theoretic years. For example, Ms. Washington asked us to look at the Country Club Park. It's in there at 19. If funds become available, it may move up to 18 or 17 or even 16. It all becomes a function of your priorities. Same thing, Mr. Willingham asked us to look at expanding the Kerr Street Fishing Pier. Again, it's in the CIP. That does not mean that it will be built in FY19, because when you adopt the CIP, you're adopting, if I may say, a 5-year plan. Only 1 year is guaranteed. That's the funding year. Everything else is still a theoretic budget.
And that concludes just the overview of the new projects that we've added for 15 and the new projects within the last or the projected 5 years. And with that being said, was there any questions that council would like? Any changes in the proposed projects or any new projects that maybe staff hasn't identified?
Go back to what we're proposing for this year one more time. What you'll notice is that your capital improvement budget for this year contains very little. And the reason why is because we're in the process of finishing capital projects that you've already authorized. For example, Jack Amyette, you have a $500,000 construction project going on over there today. I wouldn't say it was going on very well today because of the bad rain. You have Fire Station 2. You have the completion of the main station. You have Phillips Park. All of those things, so that when you look at your capital improvement budget proposed for 15, it's not like the city isn't doing anything. This is one of those years when we are doing a tremendous amount, but it is through funds that you have approved in previous years. So this is more what I'll call a construction year rather than a financing year.
I have a question on, I was looking at Kerr Street Fishing Pier, made me think about what will become of the old wildlife ramp once the new one opens.
Okay. The contract that or the agreement that we have with the wildlife is that the current ramp next to the USO must be disengaged. It must be. That's what they said. It cannot be kept. The city will be responsible for the formal closure of that. Now, the formal closure is going to consist of several components. Number one will be the actual removal of the floating dock. And we have been told by the wildlife that becomes us. It becomes our property. So if we want to disconnect it from the shore and float it up the river to Phillips Park, we can. If we decide to float it out to Northeast Creek Park, we can. If we decide to simply pull it out and, use it as a monument, we could. We're also responsible for taking out the boat ramp, and we're trying to verify with them what that actually means, because to take out the first, pick a number, 30 feet of concrete of those ramps, that's one thing. If they expect us to go out, 75, 80 feet and take out concrete that's 6 feet underwater, that's a different thing. But to answer your question, we are responsible for disengaging that park.
And that property reverts to us, or it is ours?
The property is the city's. Once the park, the Jacksonville Landing is open, there will be a process where they will release their park negotiated easement, and that will become strictly a fee simple piece of property. The city has every right to do whatever we want. You remember that in the work that 2 of your council members have been doing with 2 of the county commissioners, the proposal there is to redevelop that in the form of businesses, possibly waterfront restaurants, and we would see in the very near future, hopefully, a conversion of that parking facility into something that would be a waterfront asset. We have a business. Hearing no objections, we're going to proceed then on this assumption. Obviously, you're not adopting anything tonight. Everybody comfortable?
Anybody got anything to add?
That's it. Yeah, thank you. Nicely done. This time, I'd like to ask the 3 handsome gentlemen on the wall to come up for the presentation on the air packs. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to be before you again this evening. This is where we want to come back and speak with you once again about the air packs. We had spoke to you a few months ago about our need to replace the air packs, and I think Mr. Bittner and anyway, there were a couple of questions that council had for us, so we just wanted to kind of refresh what we'd already been through and catch up to what we've accomplished based on council's request. So I'm gonna kind of go through this quick. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. Again, this information is stuff we've gone through before. Need to replace the air packs because our air pack equipment is aging, and regardless of what we do, we're going to have to replace the tanks for our air packs within the next 4 years. So the options that we came up was looking at our current equipment, knowing that it was not compliant to the 2013 standards, and so we were looking at ways of being able to overcome that. The factors that we talked about influence the need for replacing air packs is having to deal with the customer service with the vendor that we currently have, and compatibility with our partners, things of that nature, improved designs, and meeting the newest NFPA standards with regards to the firefighter's safety. And we talked briefly about some of those things that that the new NFPA standards address, primarily like the air supply indicator for the firefighters and whatnot. Again, we have to replace our cylinders no matter what decision is made with regards to how we fund our, whether we replace our air packs or keep the ones we have or whatever the case may be. We're going to have to replace those cylinders because they life cycle out. And we've already looked at replacing those over a 4-year period if we maintain the current equipment that we have.
Is the cylinder and tank, are you using that interchangeably?
Yes, sir. Yeah. The cylinders they can take out of the air packs. They can put a new cylinder in and take that cylinder and have it filled.
But the word tank and cylinder.
Yeah, tank,
Use
cylinder,
it
yeah, I'm sorry.
Mayor, the difference between the tank and the cylinder is about $200. Other than that, they're identical.
We talked about the challenges that we'll have, part of that being the annual cost for repairs. And, currently we're spending about $19,000 a year on our current air packs. And so looking at the options, if we refurbish the current air packs we have, we'll still have air packs that have new parts and they can be functional. However, they'll still be under the old standards. They won't upgrade them to the newest standards. They have the newest safety features for the firefighters, which are required by NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association.
Can we talk just a little bit about what those standards are? For example, the masks and why it's important to have those masks upgraded.
Yeah. Well, I'll skip back to see if I can skip back to the slide that addresses some of that. For one thing, the air supply indicator is instead of an air pack for a firefighter inside of a fire alarming about 25% of the tank, when it gets down to about 25% of what the tank is actually able to hold, you can see the device in the slide presentation there is a typical device. You see the red hash there. It'll notify the firefighters that the tank's down to about 25%. The change for the NFPA standard, the newest standard, will allow that alarm to go off earlier, because what they're finding out is firefighters will stay inside the structure until that alarm goes off, which may not necessarily be the best thing. So if they alarm earlier, it helps with the efforts of trying to get the firefighters to manage their air supply better. The emergency breathing support and the personal alert safety system, they've had upgrades in that, and then the other component that Chief Yanero was referring to was the face piece. They've upgraded the amount of heat that face piece can take for a higher temperature for a longer period of time.
And what happens when it gets too hot? Generally, it fogs up, right?
Yeah. Well, it'll fog up, and the glass, if you will, it's not really glass, but the glass, if you will what they call craze over. It's almost like a spider web comes over, and it makes it really difficult to see through. So, and these standards help improve that and keep it from happening.
I have a question. If you're talking about that those standards wouldn't be met by this, then why would this even be an option?
It's like we can purchase something that may be out of date. We can continue to use it, but it's not as safe as if you.
Right.
It's one of those things that you're grandfathered in as long as you
Okay.
keep that piece of equipment. Once you get rid of that piece of equipment, then it's
You cannot replace it with
Right.
the same.
Right.
Okay.
All right. We talked about the pros and cons of refurbishing. We just basically really touched over that. We talked about purchasing new air packs, and I think Mr. Bittner made the statement we looked a little one-sided. So we wanted to add some more information to it just to kind of show that we were looking at all the options. With the pros and cons with the SCBA for Scott and some of the others, you can see here this annual cost that you see under pros is the annual maintenance cost. Okay.
And let's go down to the last one, because that's probably important for us
Right.
because of the partnership that we have with Camp Lejeune.
Right, the compatibility issue is something that right now, when we're working with Camp Lejeune, which is our primary response partner, the ones that we respond with most often, they use the Scott Air Packs now, as well as Pumpkin Center Volunteer Fire Department, which is probably our second, the second most frequent number of calls we respond to. And both those departments use the Scott Air Pack. And their tanks, if we have the Scott Air Packs, our tanks can interchange between the companies. As it stands right now, if they run out of air in their cylinders, then we've got to fill their cylinders up before they can use them again. So if the compatibility comes down to us being able to interchange tanks, as well as some of the like the buddy breathing connections in the event firefighters run into trouble inside the structure.
How long does it take to fill a tank?
Well, they say it should take about 2 minutes.
But that takes people off the.
I understand.
Yeah. All right. With the Interspiro, we'll maintain our current equipment. Obviously, that's a benefit that it's equipment that folks are already familiar with. But again, going back to the compatibility, it's limited compatibility with our response partners.
Go back one other. We would also remind you that one of the difficulties we've had is replacement parts.
Yes.
You know, Interspiro is made in Sweden. And while we would assume that they would have a lot of parts somewhere in the United States, our experience has been that when we need parts, it takes significant time, sometimes weeks and weeks. And when an air pack is out, that for all practical purposes means that people are doubling up, and you do not have the availability for every firefighter to have his proper equipment.
Right.
Can you go back to the slide previous to this? Right now, what are we paying per year as far as maintenance costs?
$26,000.
26,000.
That's parts and overtime.
Oh, parts and overtime.
Parts and labor, yeah.
So this would cost us less than $80,000 a year, and is there service contracts included with this?
It's beginning at year number, after year one, it costs us $2,720 a year to have them bench tested. And they come in, test it, and replace any warranty parts, and versus $26,000 a year.
And one of the things that, and again, tonight we're not asking y'all to approve anything. We're trying to answer additional questions that you had. But one of the advantages of Scott is the fact that you will only pay less than $3,000 a year, and they will take over the full maintenance. And that maintenance includes labor and parts. So instead of spending $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year like we are today, that money is now available to help pay debt service on the new equipment. So, I mean,
So it'd be around $80,000 too. Is
Go
what
back,
our-
Yeah.
go back one slide, I just want to see another number
Is
there.
that right?
But, okay, you got 91.5, so we're spending 90, projecting to spend 91.5 over the next 4 years, but at this one. The next one, the next option, the Scott is 102.
Correct.
But that
Yeah,
91.
but that's just refurbishing those air packs. It won't bring them up to the
Right,
current
I
standard.
understand that.
Okay.
And we'll still be incurring the same $27,000 a year in maintenance, $26,000.
Is the 91.5 including the 27,000?
No, sir. No, sir.
So it needs to be actually, you need to be added to that. That 91.5 is a low number, then it really should be whatever it is.
But that includes replacing the tanks. Is that correct?
No, sir. That's just refurbishing the packs.
Okay, now the 102 figure, does that include replacing the tanks?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because this
Yes,
is
sir.
this
It's all
will
brand
be
new gear.
all brand new gear.
From top to bottom.
So it's actually cheaper than our current. Going to the Scots would be cheaper than our current cost.
Yes, sir.
But again, what we're trying to show you this evening is additional information.
Right.
You should generally think that if we're going to move forward with any of these vendors, we need to put somewhere around $100,000 in the budget. Because Gail will purchase these, whatever we purchase, whichever option we take, she will purchase that through a loan that we will do debt, and we'll pay that up over 5 years, Gail? Okay. So generally $100,000, whichever option. One of the advantages of this option is the fact that it's all new, it is all compatible, and the long-term maintenance is on somebody else for less than $3,000 a year. Spence?
Yeah.
Did Lejeune purchase the Scots based on performance, cost, or a combination of both?
Combination of both. So moving along, if we purchase new Interspiro units, again, we're continue maintaining a device that we're already familiar with. And you can see the annual debt service will be $103,100. That's for purchasing all new units. But that price does still not include the labor, as we've already discussed. So you'll still be paying that $26,000 a year on top of that $103,000.
Do you get a sense that Camp Lejeune will stay at the Scots, and they're not in a process of looking at replacing anything where
No.
we'd switch
Yeah.
the Scots and they go somewhere else?
As a matter of fact, they're getting ready to invest in some Bluetooth technology where they can interface their radios with the face pieces on their airpacks.
But, Mr. Warden, what we can do though, because what we would not want to do is buy Scott and then move to Interspiro. So what we can do before we get into the actual purchase arrangements, we can document in writing exactly what the base is going to be doing.
Yeah.
What about, just an idea, I know that it's one thing working between municipal departments or departments of the state, but what about piggybacking on their purchases of this equipment? Is that something that could theoretically be done?
Well, yeah. Well, we do have access to GSA pricing, which would be the same thing. And there's other purchasing alliances like the Charlotte Purchasing Alliance that we've purchased equipment through as well as the same.
Is that what we would do here?
Yeah.
Is that what these prices are based on?
Yes, sir.
CCPA.
So this is adding additional information we didn't have in the last meeting. That's because the information at the last meeting wasn't even available. So now we have information from MSA, which is a local vendor for mine safety appliance. You can see that the pros essentially will be the same as it would be for the Scots. Their annual cost of maintenance will be approximately the same amount. However, the difference will be is that their annual debt service will be more because the cost of the devices are more. So that's $114,900 versus $103,000 with the Scots. And we'll tie all this together. We also are looking at other manufacturers which they don't have a device that's even available. There's not even NFPA compliant to the new 2013 standards. So we don't have any data. They can't give us a price on what those devices would be. That'd be Honeywell, Avon, and Draeger. There are 3 other manufacturers. What we do want to let council know is that we are intending on doing a formal analysis on these air pipes. We're not just going out willy-nilly looking for the cheapest air pipe. We want to do a impartial, relevant, and valid review. And this is based on some information that we obtained that the Department of Homeland Security has done the exact same thing back in April 2006. They conducted a study that, as a third-party independent reviewer, that identified some areas that we can use as a model for formal analysis. And their study came up and identified 4 different air pipe manufacturers, which included Scott, MSA, Draeger, and Survivair, which Survivair and Draeger, Survivair is now Honeywell, as you saw on one of the previous slides, and Draeger, neither one of them have compliant packs yet. So when their packs become compliant, then we'll look at these features of affordability, compatibility, deployability, usability, so on and so forth, to see which will be the best overall air pipe. So this will kind of give you a comparison side by side with what we have available so far with regards to Scott, Innispiro, MSA, and Draeger. With the total replacement costs, you can see across the bottom of what that would be. And that includes your the SCBA, the masks, and voice amplifiers.
What we're providing you tonight is simply additional information to show you that we have identified additional vendors. We're not asking you to approve anything. As you go through the draft budget in about a month, you will see this built into their base budget. This is one of those issue statements, and we will be asking you to give us direction. After if you approve money in the budget, then we will proceed to do further analysis and bring back to you an actual purchase request. But this was intended to answer questions which Mr. Bittner, and I know Mayor, you had some additional questions and hopefully we have addressed those through this.
How many units is this price based on?
68?
68 packs.
68 packs, which is what we have right now.
And how many tanks?
176.
And how many cylinders?
That's cylinders.
Yeah, thank you.
You said at the beginning that if we just stayed with what we had and started refurbishing, that replacements would be required over the next X number of years.
Those are the tanks.
For the tanks or cylinders, yes.
If we go with something like this, aren't we going to end up like we talk about with a lot of our fire trucks and everything else that we're going to have? We bought it all at the same time.
Right, and that's
14 years down the road, we're going to have to buy them all again, or 15 years.
Yes, sir. That's one of the things that we had talked about before in the last meeting. Was one of the concepts we were looking at is if we purchased, say, Scott, for example, because we discussed the interchangeability of face pieces. Scott had the same face piece that they used in 1977 will work on air pipe that they manufacture today. Now it's not compliant with the newest standards, but the point of it is their parts have not changed that much over the years. The point of that being is that if we went with a vendor like Scott, for example, and we maintained that air pipe, we could start changing out the air pipe years 8, 9, and 10. Start rotating them out so we don't hit the budget with 500,000 or the big spike in on the budget.
So then you're not using them for their full life. You're talking about just anticipating.
Well, 10, 11, and 12
Right,
then.
right.
Depending on when the new standards
Yeah.
come out. Standards come out anywhere between 3 and 4 years to 6 or 7 years changes in the standard.
The other thing that we're going to be trying to do, especially if we're able to get in a little bit better financial position, is setting up some reserves so that you're setting in ahead of time money for some of these large spikes, whether it's the replacement of the ladder truck or whether it's the replacement of breathing apparatus. The difficulty that you have faced is that we have not done that as a staff for you. So what we've got to do is find a way to, just to pick a number, that we set aside for fire equipment, pick a number, 400,000 every year. And that with that, we have level budgeting rather than these huge spikes. Now, even though we're going through debt service for a lot of these purchases, that concept is something that we've got to try to work into the future budgets. But we're not doing any future council a favor if we don't do any of that in 10, 12, 14 years from now. Another council is sitting around, or y'all with just a little bit more gray hair, are sitting around and you're asked to buy another full outfit.
Except for bulletproof vest.
Can you think of other questions that you would like for us to try to answer before we get into the budgets?
We thank you for your time.
This really is somewhat related. Bulletproof vests, Chief, for our police officers, how are they replaced? I mean, that's an expensive item, not as expensive as an air pack, but I know they have shelf lives.
The shelf life of a bulletproof vest is 5 years. One of the things that we've been trying to do over the last several years is, first, because we use the bulletproof vest grant, we look at those vests and we have them programmed on a
Schedule.
On the schedule. And what we do basically is, which is something we probably should do here. The issue that we have is with the Interspiros is the fact that the cost involved in it.
Right.
That's why we brought it to you as this presentation, rather than simply buying those over the next 4 years.
So you've said it's probably not practical to phase it in over 4 years?
Yeah, the issue is with the air pack is because somebody grabs an air pack and they have to have their personal masks. Remember those things. It's really difficult for us to get rid of like 3 or 4 Interspiros this year and buy Scott and replace them on that period.
You can't use an Scott mask with an Interspiro?
No, sir.
So you got some of these.
But now, relative to the bulletproof vest, I believe that you said that you already have a schedule.
Right.
And the nice thing is the funding source for that comes from, you said, a grant?
It comes from the bulletproof vest grant, but we put that into a project item, and we purchase those vests out of there. But we have to purchase a number of vests every year in order to get the maximum use of that grant money.
So we've had the luxury of being able to put it on a schedule, because at some point in time, the federal government could say, okay, we're not going to fund any more bulletproof vests, but that doesn't remove our obligation, probably moral and, legal obligations, probably to supply those vests. So
It's interesting that you talk about those vests, because one of the things that happened was at one particular year, the vests, because of the fibers, the company replaced them all, whether they were 2, 3, 4, or 5 years old. So
something about a degradation of the fiber
Right.
after so many years. Yeah.
So we had all those vests that were replaced one year in that 2, 3, but we were able to work with that process and replace those vests back on that kind of schedule.
I mean, we know that this is going to be something that's going to probably go on into perpetuity. I think I'm using the word right. But the sooner we can get it on a schedule of rotation, we're probably going to be a lot better off. And like you say, it'll soften the fiscal blow.
Mayor Phillips, we currently do that with our turnout gear now.
Okay.
We buy X number of sets per year to work, so we know the shelf life of it and the maintainability life of it. So we currently do that, flatline that area pretty much.
And we're doing more and more equipment as we go along, trying, like the AEDs, for example, that's another one.
Flatline.
And AEDs are?
Automated external defibrillators. That's
Do
part
we-
of our first responder equipment.
Is that on every vehicle now?
Yes, sir.
How about the police?
Every police and fire vehicle.
Saved some lives, haven't they?
Another one of those benefits of living in the
12
city
in
of
the last
Jacksonville.
15 months.
And while we're talking about that, just a minute, you'll hear, you already know this, but we'll be recognizing these personnel shortly. But the latest case we saved was?
8-day-old infant, just about 2 weeks ago.
Worth every penny of it, right?
Yep.
Now, is there any residual value to what we're talking about replacing? On the aftermarket for?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we replace the air packs that we currently have with new air packs, there's a couple options that we know we can look at. One is that the air packs that we have now can be taken in as trade-in, has some trade-in value.
With the same company? You wouldn't switch between companies, obviously.
Well,
Scott would trade them in, and they basically just harvest them out to
Yeah.
a reseller somewhere.
So no matter which way we go, we're not going to get an exorbitant amount out of them anyway.
So with the Interspiro, we could get something for them?
Yeah, the ones we currently have now, yeah.
The other thing is you'll find that divers will take the air tank. You know, it's technically out of service relative to a firefighter, but this tank is no different than an air tank that now the apparatus may be a little different. But there is a market. We have chuckled about the fact that if we agreed to throw in the Quint that we're getting ready to take offline, we're probably double the value of these breathing apparatus. But there is a residual market. You should think of that as a market, though, that's going to produce less than $10,000. It's not going to produce a lot of money for you.
And in light of the truck, just to advise council, Chief Hardison and some of the staff will be going up tomorrow to pick up our new truck from C.W. Williams.
But we've told them, don't go up there if it's raining. We do not want that truck coming into town dirty. So,
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate Chief, appreciate it.
Chief, Director.
Director, that's right. He's the director. He's director.
Mayor, the next item we have should take about 20 minutes. If you'd like, we will continue rather than take a break. Is that acceptable?
Knock it out.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what we're facing in the upcoming budget. As you know, revaluation has now been completed except for the appeals. And you can see in the light blue, basically Carolina blue, that the valuation last year was, pretty high. And you can see that in the Duke blue, that it has gone down significantly. There's $114 million reduction in your tax base. Now, why is that? We've been through the discussions with Harry Smith, the appraiser. We know that ad valorem, or the base values of houses, has come down. We know that the commercial property has gone up. What we're also aware, though, is that as commercial properties have received their appraised value, that we're seeing many of them appeal that value. So this number, if you will remember when Harry talked to us talked to you back in January, he was thinking it was about 80 million. And you can see that it has floated up significantly, and it may continue to go up a little bit because of those appeals.
Is this a county or the
Percentage-wise,
city?
what is that?
City.
What is that percentage-wise? It seems like that
3%.
figure's at variance with what we previous.
It does seem different than what we got in the email.
Well, that's what I'm saying is what you originally saw was a value of about, last time it was 3,700,000,000 and something million. It's now 3,600,000 and something, and it's gone down. I mean, it has dropped significantly. It's dropped about 40 million more than what we showed y'all several months ago.
What does that equate to in money?
Well,
Percentage.
let's, in percentages, I'm gonna let Gail do the quick percentages, but let me show you
3%. Right.
3 or 4% reduction. Now, here is the tax rate. You're currently at 53.8. The revenue tax rate, the revenue neutral tax rate is 56.98.
That's provided the appeals doesn't
Stay.
lopside the whole thing.
That's correct. If we continue to have adjustments in the appeals, this number could go even higher, because remember, it is not intended, this change in the rate is not intended to produce more money, it's intended to produce the same money. So what you're looking at is over a 3-cent increase in the rate. Now, that alone doesn't mean anybody's tax is going to go up and down. What it means is that in order to generate the same roughly $18 to $19 million that we get from ad valorem taxes, you will have a tax rate that is higher. Now, when you look at what that means relative to 1 cent of revenue, what 1 cent produces, generally we have told you that it produces about $365,000. Technically, it's like 361. That's the difference between Gail's math and mine. This coming year, 1 cent will generate $353,000. So 1 cent is down. 1 cent is going to produce about $8,000 less in the coming year than it has in the past 4 years. Sales tax, while we know there were adjustments and those things are what they are, the FY14 budget is built upon roughly 9.6 million. We are fortunate that we are going to see that go up to 10.3, 10.2, somewhere in that range. Would also remind you that the current formula, as other communities increase their tax rate, you will see our proportion come down. So, you know, the good news in what we've shown you so far is even with those adjustments by others, like North Topsail and others who raised their taxes this past year, you are going to have about $600,000 more in ad valorem, as far as sales tax. Privilege license. We use the term that privilege license generate about $750,000. So in the budget this year, we're proposing that number. What is interesting on sales tax is that the state is currently discussing modifications to the privilege license. Their modifications range from a flat fee that is optional but cannot exceed $100 up to just eliminating it completely. This is something that you and your sister cities are already involved in, and we're going to have to get more involved in. Because if the state takes away that revenue source, they are not giving you a revenue source to replace it. If they took away the entire thing, you're talking about needing more than a 2-cent tax increase on property just to make up the $750,000. Communities like Charlotte are talking about millions of dollars that they're going to lose. And if you believe that the state legislature is going to be friendly to municipalities on this, I would say to you, I hope and pray you're right. But reality says you're not going to be right.
Well, the bad thing about it, too, I don't know if you were going to point this out, but the ones that are paying, you know, a high number now, say like some of the box stores that are huge consumers of city services, are going to drop from their current rates to $100.
That's
if
true.
That's what they allow.
If any.
We'll show you some of that information in a second.
It's crazy.
Who pays the current business tax privilege license? Well, generally, there are 3,000 licenses, just as a general number. And what you'll see here is that 8.8% pay somewhere $500 or more. You will notice that 91% pay less than $500 for that fee. A tremendous amount pay significantly less than that. Where does the money come from? If you'll notice in the 53%, there are 78 businesses that currently pay 53% of your $750,000. Now, while that sounds disproportional, if you remember this is done on gross sales, what that tells you is the places that have the most business are the ones who are paying the most privilege license. So for example, if you have big boxes, many of whom were very pleased that they moved here in the last several years, they're the ones who are in that 78 count. If you're really talking about, pardon the expression, your mom and pop stores, they're the ones down in the 26%, and they're the ones who make up the bulk. Out of roughly 3,000 privilege licenses, you can see almost 2,800 are in that 26%. Of the total revenue, and this is pretty staggering, but it shows you the impact. Now, I will tell you, we cannot tell you who these stores are because that's privileged information. Under the Public Records Act, we cannot tell you who these stores are. We can let you use your imagination, though. 2 stores in town pay 12%. 2 stores in town pay almost $100,000. And under the state's proposal, that $100,000 will move down to $100.
200.
200, correct. Yeah, 2 stores. You are good for math and many other things. That's good. But the point we're making is these are stores where the only people who shop there are the people who live inside the city. Because we know that if you don't live inside the city, you can't come into the city to shop. Right? What we know is these two stores and every other store in Jacksonville benefit from the fact we are the regional market, and people from all over the county and other counties come here to shop. You have to look at the privilege license as nothing different than the sales tax. It is a way that everybody that uses your town and your businesses and your services pay the freight of operating your police department and your fire department and your streets and your mowing. Here's an interesting thing. These two stores generated last year 1,764 calls for service from the police department. So it's not like, if you pardon the expression, that the city government is out milking businesses, that we're out bilking people out of money. It's a way of spreading the responsibility of paying for government, but it's also a reflection that those who are paying the most, in most cases, they're the ones who are generating the calls, because you have shoplifting, you have domestic arguments, you have accidents in the parking lot, whatever it may be. Now, my simple math basically says this. They're basically paying $50 to $60 every time they call the police department. That's what their privilege license is paying for. And that's at least being paid by people who don't just live inside the city. Again, if we lose this revenue, it's not like we're suddenly going to say to the police department, okay, cut out those calls. And it's not like we're going to be able to say to the police department, cut off that number of employees. You could. Don't think you want to go there. Who is going to pick up the freight then? It's going to be only the people who live inside the city, have businesses inside the city, who pay property tax. It is a shift away from the users of the community to the property owners of the community. And I will tell you, that is wrong. While there may be a lot of things wrong with the current privilege licenses around the state, the cure that they have come up with, in my opinion, is, if the old saying goes, the cure is worse than the disease. Before we leave this, let's go back one, please. Okay. Before we leave this, I would like for you to know that we are going to be presenting to you a campaign which we're going to ask each of you to engage in to help us educate our business community in Jacksonville and the property owners of Jacksonville, because what happens with any matter is, unless people let their elected officials know something, the path will never change. So we're going to be asking you to get personally involved in contacting some of the businesses here, some of the property owners here, for them to begin to understand the consequences. And let me just give you one consequence. If we lose this money and we have to go to property tax, what does that actually mean for some businesses? Currently, if you're a dentist, you don't pay the city a business license. You pay the state that license. And the state shares that money back with the city. Well, I don't think that actually happens. I was just hoping. Now, what's going to happen to that dentist who's currently paying, pick a number, $200 or $300? Those 2 cents are now going to be applied to his dentist office. And instead of paying whatever he would have been paying, in this case he wasn't paying anything, he's now going to see his ad valorem property bill go up. People don't realize that. You know, this is not like we're sitting here with $750,000 extra dollars that every year we sit around and say, well, you know, how can we spend this money? I'm really trying to draw your attention, but hopefully there's citizens out there who are watching tonight that we're trying to draw their attention to the fact that when the state legislature does something and they tout it on the basis that municipalities have been irresponsible and municipalities are not business friendly, for every action there is a reaction. And in this case, it's a very negative reaction, because the negative reaction spreads this from all the people who use the city to all the people who own property in the city. And I will tell you, I believe that is wrong. So we're going to have to really pay attention on this issue. Now, moving on with the rest of the presentation.
I want to ask one question. Do we
Yes,
have
sir.
any feeling about how our local representatives stand on this?
We have meetings that we're setting up right now. I can tell you from my initial conversations with at least one of them, they're very concerned about this. We're not sure how the other two feel, but we will know within the next week how all three of them feel, because we are making calls to set up appointments to
We've
talk about
sent
it.
letters to them, haven't we?
We have
on this
sent
issue?
letters. The mayor sent a letter about a month ago, Mayor?
Yeah, it's been about a month.
And the timeline in Raleigh, do we know that?
It's still in committee, as far as I know. It hasn't come out of
Actually,
committee.
it was reported out by the Revenue Laws Committee. And my understanding is it's going to be brought up in the short session. The short session begins May. And that if the bill as currently drafted is adopted, it would go into effect July 1 of 2015. But it still is going to have that impact.
Are we drafting any proposals to send as potential alternatives that they've asked for?
Yes. What we are doing right now is not only putting together the campaign I discussed with you, but we're also coming up with 3 or 4 options. What we know in Raleigh is this: you run a risk of playing the game win all or lose all. We have to come up with options that we think are reasonable, because I will tell you, the general feeling is that most people in Raleigh currently don't understand what we've just explained to you, the impact it's going to have on city government and the taxpayers of the city. So we are preparing 3 or 4 options. One option that we're looking at would be a tier, where instead of paying just a flat $100, that maybe if you have gross receipts from here to here, it's $100. If you have gross receipts from there to there, it becomes some other number, and so forth. In the end, though, none of those options will address the loss of money from the big boxes. Now, I will also remind you of one other thing, without mentioning the name of those big boxes. If that big box in Jacksonville is going to go from paying $100,000 down to paying $200, and if practically every city in the state has that big box, you're talking about $15 to $25 million in lost taxes to the municipalities of this state. And who is going to wind up with that money? That company and its shareholders. I mean, we're
They're
just
probably
talking.
working harder than we are then.
Well, actually, to my knowledge, they're not the ones who complained. What this actually came out of was one representative who had a business go from $500 to $8,000 in his community, and he felt that was wrong. And maybe it was wrong. I'm not saying it wasn't. What I'm saying, though, is the real winners here are going to be the big box retailers who never have complained about this system. And the real losers here are going to be the taxpayers who own property taxes in every city.
Well, there was some talk of holding the cities harmless, but I don't know how they plan to do that unless they were going to allow you to implement sales tax to try to recover some of it. Is that what you understand, or?
Well, that's what the early discussion was. Right. We have not seen a proposal yet that makes it revenue neutral.
Well, the league and the Mayor's Association are working really hard lobbying against this, and they have been included in the discussions. So at least we're getting heard, whether it falls on deaf ears or not.
we know how successful they've been in the past.
And that's why, Mr. Bittner, you're right. That's why we've got to get the dentists, the lawyers, we need to get every segment that understands what's getting ready to happen to them involved in this. Because we can speak, the 16 largest municipalities, we can speak as one voice on this. We're not being heard. I mean, the city of Charlotte alone is looking at losing, Ron, what, 20-something $million?
I've heard two different numbers, but.
Greensboro was like 2 million, I think, is what theirs was.
Doesn't sound like much.
No, I
Compared
think
to
it's
ours.
more than that. I think Raleigh was like 13 million.
There may have been a typo, but in that
Yeah.
thing that Julie put out the other day, it said $2 million.
But that may be because remember, there is no one set of formulas that anybody uses.
Right.
And
And
that
they
is
may
one of
not
the
be using that
criticisms.
gross receipts formula.
That's right. They may be using
So-
a different formula. And in all fairness, that is one of the criticisms that we have, is that the law allows you to have a business license. They only give you certain guidance as to how it has to be implemented. Going on to budget issues, declining fund balance is going to be one. I know that when you look at the fund balance in big numbers, it appears that we actually went up this year. The reality is, in what I'll call cash, which is what we deal with, we went down. And we've been going down for a number of years. Declining fund balance is going to be one of the issues. Bond coverage. You know, we issued bonds for the Center for Public Safety, Fire Station 2, and Sturgeon City. Those bond coverage requirements in there say you have to produce so much money. And right now, you know that we are generating, or out of our 53.8 cents, 3.8, Gail, goes to the bonds.
That's the public safety center debt.
Right. So that money, we're going to have to look at the bond coverage. We continue to look at funding of sanitation. While we certainly have talked about front-end collection, here we're talking about residential collection. How are you going to fund it?
What are we at now, $5?
You're at $5.
Five for the
Five for collection, five
the
for dumping,
disposal.
yeah.
Yeah. But for us, I look at it as a $5 fee, because the other five is
Given away.
disposal. Funds for the air packs, mowing. Let's talk about mowing a second. Many of you have had the opportunity to see the Beirut Memorial Grove. It's amazing how far along they are. We sent you an email today. They are getting close. Once it's there, we got a ton of mowing to do out there, because to be quite frank with you, we thought they were going to be mulching the whole thing. The bid came in well enough, they put sod over the whole thing. You've got the Jacksonville Parkway. A lot of mowing is going to be expanding because, and you'll have to decide, do you want to mow it? Do you not? We're going to be looking at employee issues relative to what you want to do with compensation. Insurance. Now, I will tell you right now, it looks pretty good for our insurance, health insurance premiums. If the trend stays good for the next 2 or 3 months, then we're looking at a nominal increase, and we may be able to absorb that through the insurance reserve rather than having to have more money. The jury's still out on that one. Sturgeon City, we've mentioned to you before, the last opinion of probable cost, we're about $300,000 short on building that building. And we agreed that rather than continue to chase a theoretic number, that we would get bids in, and then we'll decide what do we cut out of the building, or how do we come up with more money. Station 2. On your agenda tonight, we have the issues of rebuilding the contingency fund there, because as we know, we didn't anticipate the difficulties with dirt. And that building is, one of these days, if it ever stops raining, we will be able to finally get it truly under construction. And then there'll be other challenges that you will hear as we go through the issues. Now, at the end of the day, what's been our tax rate history? You can see it. You can see where revaluation impacted it. You can see where the redistribution of sales tax impacted it. And you know that through revenue neutral, you're looking at a tax rate of 56.98. What the final millage, I'm sorry, that's a Florida term, what the final tax rate will be is something you will determine as we go through the budget. And where are we? Well, the fun is getting ready to begin. Tonight is the preliminary numbers, beginning April 15th or 22nd, depending on how far along we are. We're going to get into weekly meetings with you to go through the departments, item, line, department, public hearings in May, and of course, final adoption no later than June the 30th. I don't want to paint a bleak picture for you. What I do want to paint for you, though, is a realistic picture. A lot of challenges ahead. I'm convinced that working together, we can overcome every one of them, and that we can find a way to continue to provide quality service and to continue with the progress that y'all have established. Questions that you may have of what you've seen?
I only have one question. I've thought about it obviously a lot, but it seems like we're with the effect other municipalities in the county can have on us. We're throwing darts at a dartboard that could be moving around. And is there any lines of communication we could establish with the other, what would be Richlands, Holly Ridge, Swansboro, North Topsail? Is that the four other, is there more than four other municipalities? Is that right?
Well, plus Surf City to some extent.
Oh, Surf City and the county. I mean, that's, that seems to me one of the biggest challenges right this year is to know what you set out to do, you might not do because of what they do.
But there's a year lag in that. In other words, you don't see that until the sales tax in the following year.
Oh, okay. So it's not immediate.
That's exactly right. So you're not going to be chasing your tail immediately. You're going to be responding. Yeah.
Okay.
But you do bring up a very important point. Having a positive relationship with the county government is essential. And I know every one of you have pledged to work to rebuild that relationship. And I believe that the county commission is likewise pledged to do the same. Mr. Hudson and I are talking about having some joint meetings in the near future to discuss some of those issues. Having good relationships with your sister cities, it's important. At the end of the day, cooperation always gets you a whole lot more than whatever the opposite of cooperation is. So, but it's an important point. Any other questions that you have for us?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.